This is the entire Justice League 6th Dimension storyline, a story where the Justice League meets evil future versions of themselves in less than 18 minutes. Could the Justice League trust an older version of Superman that they'd never met before? Well, they weren't really left with any other choice because Lex Luthor and the Legion of Doom were reawakening Perpetua, the mother of the multiverse, an entity so powerful that she was capable of existing in the 6th dimension, a place beyond imagination, and described as the control room of the multiverse that she intended on corrupting. The Justice League thought long and hard about how they could avoid this, and it all came down to a 5th dimensional imp named Mr. Mxyzptlk, one of Superman's most powerful foes. They needed his help, so they devised a plan to trap him in a chamber that would hopefully disable his powers, but upon his arrival, their strategy failed. The chamber proved to be pointless, and he effortlessly dismantled them one by one, turning the Flash's feet into blocks of concrete, manipulating John Stewart into some sort of circus act, and holding the rest of the League captive by turning the Daily Planet into a living monster. And you may be asking yourself, Mr. Mxyzptlk was powerful enough to do that? He was, but he wasn't clever enough to resist Martian Manhunter's telepathic ability to flood his mind with an attack that would make him say his own name if he resisted it, which Mr. Mxyz couldn't do because when he says his own name, he gets sent back to the 5th dimension. And he didn't want to go there because after the Justice League broke the source wall, it was in shambles and dying. In fact, he knew that the Justice League needed his help. He just wanted to have some fun with them. So when they told him that Hawkgirl's wings had some kind of map leading to a key in the 5th dimension that could possibly help them fix the crumbling multiverse, he corrected them and stated that the map was actually leading to the 6th dimension, Perpetua's dimension. But Wonder Woman asked how they'd even be able to survive there if it was beyond their comprehension. Was it even possible? It wasn't. Not for any of them but Superman. Superman was the only one powerful enough to be able to withstand such a thing because over the years Mr. Mxyz had been secretly infusing his body with 5th dimensional energy that could protect him for this very moment because he knew it would eventually happen. Batman was highly against Clark going. It was too big of a risk in his eyes. Losing Superman was one of the most detrimental things that could ever happen to the League, but Clark knew that he had to go because they were running out of time. So Mr. Mxyz opened up a portal leading to the 6th dimension, and Clark walked right through it despite Bruce's worries about him possibly being gone for decades. But somehow, just a few short moments after going in and shutting the door, Clark opened it back up but was now older, wiser, and seemingly godlike, expressing that they had won, that he had found one path to save the multiverse amongst trillions of others. After Old Man Clark claimed to have saved the multiverse, he encouraged the Justice League to follow him through the 6th dimensional portal, expressing that it wouldn't hurt them because it was set to handle their energy signatures. So they hesitantly stepped through it and were instantly teleported to a world that looked like paradise where they met what seemed like older, wiser, and more powerful versions of themselves. But although they didn't know it at the time, something was clearly wrong because the Clark they were speaking to wasn't the real Clark at all. It couldn't have been, because the real Clark was desperately seeking help in a seemingly bottomless pit filled with bodies on top of bodies, but not just any bodies, dead versions of himself. He was helpless, shouting at the top of his lungs like he'd never shouted before because for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeless, which was the exact opposite of what the Justice League was feeling. Because after going on a tour of the House of Justice, a museum dedicated to their victory, they were pretty impressed, with the exception of Batman. Well, he was impressed but eager to find out how they did it. He wanted to know how they saved the multiverse because time was of the essence, but Old Man Clark encouraged him and the others to relax, to enjoy their utopia for the day, and that he'd get to the important stuff tomorrow. So they did, and not only was it beautiful, but it was peaceful, harmonious. There wasn't any conflict at all. The Mascara was now a place devoted to sharing the truth. Mars was repopulated with Martians, which greatly excited Martian Manhunter. Him and Hawkgirl had a son together named Shane, and craziest of all was that Barry and John had found a way to use the life entity ability to restore parts of the multiverse that were lost in the war. They were practically gods, but unfortunately for Bruce, he was no longer with them during this time. Dick Grayson was actually the one behind the cow, because apparently Bruce sacrificed his life to save everyone. But like he always is, Bruce was skeptical of what was being conveyed and filled with questions, with the first of them being, where the hell are all the villains? It all felt too good to be true, and what confirmed that was the case was Shane, Martian Manhunter and Hawkgirl's son, because later that night he approached them expressing that they needed to leave, that this place wasn't what they thought it was, but they didn't understand, so in an act of desperation, he used his psychic abilities to enter their mind and show them what he really meant. Meanwhile, the real Clark was still trying to escape his prison, leaping up into the sky over and over again. Despite how many times he had failed, he refused to give up because there was nothing stopping him from at least trying. Nothing until he was met face to face with Old Man Clark, telling him that they needed to talk. As soon as Superman was faced with Old Man Clark, he attacked him, throwing punch after punch while calling him a monster, because Old Man Clark told him the truth. He revealed why he trapped him in this little pocket universe, so Supes gave it his best to take him down, but Old Man Clark was clearly a force to be reckoned with. None of Supes' punches affected him in the slightest, and he was able to stop him with nothing more than a finger, and after doing so he slammed Supes onto the ground, expressing that he'd kill him if he continued to fight him. Superman was in pain, stating that the Justice League wouldn't be fooled by his tricks much longer, to which Old Man Clark replied, "I'm not trying to fool them, I'm trying to save them from you, the person that dooms them in every universe." Meanwhile, Bruce was having tea with Grayson. He had finally started to enjoy the idea of this utopian future. Gotham was finally safe. It was what he had always wanted, but then the truth started to unveil itself when Martian Manhunter infiltrated his mind, calling for a psychic boardroom meeting with their fellow members of the League, where he tried explaining that this place was only possible through a dark path that they'd never take. But before he could elaborate, Old Man Clark slammed onto the middle of the table, openly admitting that he wasn't their Clark. He intended on revealing who he really was from the very beginning, but didn't think any of them would trust him if he were in his true form, so he recreated Superman cell by cell. But it was time for him to take off the mask now, and unveil the truth of who he really was, which was none other than the World Forger. And he claimed that this multiverse was their only hope, and that every other path besides this one would lead to doom. But why did he keep his identity a secret for so long? Why was he hiding the truth about this place? Well, because the only way that this could all be possible was by destroying their multiverse and replacing it with this one, because whether they liked it or not, Perpetua was eventually gonna wake up, and once that happened, their multiverse was doomed. But if they acted now and chose to side with him, the side that he claimed was justice, then there would be a chance. But was it really justice? Was it something the League was willing to do? Because if so, they'd have to imprison trillions of people for all of eternity. All of the people that voted against replacing the multiverse, which would cause a massive war that lasted for years. They couldn't do it. They felt it was wrong, that they do things the way they always did, rely on hope and on each other. They were willing to take their chances against Perpetua, all of them except surprisingly Batman. After weighing their options, he wasn't sure if they could come out on top of this, if they really had a chance this time. So when the World Forger told everyone to vote, the entire League with the exception of Batman was sent to Apokolips, where all of the people who sided against the World Forger were imprisoned, and upon their arrival, they all agreed on finding Superman and escaping, but then suddenly out of nowhere they were blasted onto the ground by a squadron of armed soldiers, telling them that they'd never find Superman because they destroyed him. Hawkgirl then asked the leader who they were, and upon doing so, the leader took off their mask, and it was none other than Lois Lane, saying that she was the one who runs this place. Lois Lane was the commander of a highly advanced prison security team on Apokolips. The prison she overlooked was filled with beings from old multiverses that didn't have a place in the new one, and once the Justice League was sent there by the World Forger for not accepting the new multiverse, she successfully dismantled them and locked them away with the help of her task force. Typically, Lois Lane would never be part of such a thing, but after explaining herself, it was clear that she only took this position for her son, John, because she was tired of seeing him dying on the many paths that the World Forger took to find this one, the only one that would allow them to survive. Now, Batman, on the other hand, he wasn't fully on board with the World Forger, but willing to listen to him, and when the World Forger assured him that this was the only way forward, he asked what he'd have to do in order for things to work, and it wasn't something that was gonna be an easy decision, because essentially what the World Forger was asking him to do was kill Superman, because their Superman wasn't just any Superman, he was Prime Superman, the strongest of them all. Essentially, the World Forger was like, your Superman is him, bro, and if anyone has a chance at stopping me and stopping this multiverse from moving forward, it's him. So what I need you to do is move all the suns in the little pocket universe that I stuck him in and move them even further away from him so he'll die. But before seeing if Bruce was really up for the cause, the comic jumped back over to Apokolips, where the entire Justice League was trying to break out of their cell, but all of their attempts failed because the restraints placed on their wrists were draining their powers and making them weak. But luckily, a big-headed little green alien boy, aka Shane, Martian Manhunter and Hawkgirl's son, snuck his way into the facility by telepathically blocking the guards from sensing his arrival. And then after that, he used every ounce of power that he had to break them out of their cell, but the amount of power that he used was actually way too much, and he accidentally broke everyone out of their prison cells, including all of the villains. And what do villains do when they see superheroes? They try and kill them. So the Justice League starts running for their lives in the direction of a launch pad that was supposed to have all these ships for them to escape on, but when they got there, there was nothing, not a single ship for them to take off in. So they started to panic for a little bit, but then in the most unlikely twist of all, the Legion of Doom showed up in a massive ship, signaling them to get in and saving them in the process. And not only was the Legion of Doom on this ship, but the one and only Darkseid was as well, and he was actually piloting it. Meanwhile, back at the World Forger's penthouse, Batman was unsure if he had it in him to kill Clark, because he was not only his partner, but his best friend. But in the end, he felt like he didn't have a choice because the entire multiverse was at stake. So when the World Forger assured him that Clark's death would be quick and painless, he dishearteningly pulled the trigger. All of the suns were immediately pulled away even further from Clark's location, instantly causing him to fade away into the deep and dark abyss. Batman tried killing Superman by moving all of the suns far away from him. He didn't want to, but he didn't really have a choice because the World Forger was kind of forcing him to, because if he didn't, Superman would have stopped the new multiverse from coming into fruition. The same multiverse that the Justice League was also trying to prevent. But they were stuck with the Legion of Doom and Darkseid in a cruiser being hunted down by Lois Lane and a fleet of warships, which was really weird because usually the Legion of Doom and Darkseid are bad guys, but in this story that was a thing of the past because these versions claimed that Lex Luthor, Batman, and the rest of the Justice League eventually became very corrupt in the new multiverse. So bad that they were willing to do whatever it was gonna take to stop the World Forger from bringing the new multiverse to life, even if it meant helping their greatest foes. But in order to reach him, they needed to get to a portal leading back to the House of Justice, but that would only be possible by escaping Lois and her fleet first. And that didn't seem very likely because when they tried pulling away, she started blasting their ship with beams of energy that would eventually put all of them to sleep. So Darkseid and the Legion did the unthinkable, the only thing that would ensure that the World Forger would be stopped, shooting the Justice League out of their cannons and into the portal leading to the House of Justice, while simultaneously sacrificing their lives by ramming their ship into one of the warships. Meanwhile, the World Forger was showing Bruce a device called the Sunbox, a device that he would eventually create and integrate into one of the most powerful Batsuits of all time, the Final Batsuit, a suit so powerful that it would allow him to change people's minds, which is what he did to the Justice League when they refused to accept the new multiverse. But then suddenly a massive explosion erupted, and not just any explosion, it was the Justice League, fresh out of the portal that they were cannonballed into, ready to put the World Forger and future versions of themselves to a stop once and for all. But they were definitely at a disadvantage, and not just because their future counterparts were more powerful than them, but because moments later Bruce appeared stating that they should have stayed on Apokolips, implying that they'd have to go through him as well while he was wearing the final Batsuit. Superman's body started to shrivel up after Batman seemingly pulled the suns away from him. He was very weak and barely able to move. Without the sun's energy, he was practically powerless. It seemed like darkness was going to be the last thing he would ever see. But moments later, way off in the distance coming towards him were little glowing dots. Could it be? Was he actually seeing suns? As hope began to flood his body, Superman's face broke out into a smile. He uttered Bruce's name, knowing that his friend didn't give up on him, knowing that Bruce pulled through. Meanwhile, the Justice League and their six-dimensional counterparts were battling it out in front of the Hall of Justice, and it was absolute chaos. Green Lantern John and White Lantern John's power rings clashed against each other. Hawkgirl and the other Hawkgirl were trying to smash each other with their maces. The two Wonder Womans were absolutely duking it out. The Flashes were moments away from colliding into each other, and both of the Martians were like Godzilla-sized going at it in the city. But the Sixth Dimension League eventually took the upper hand because at the end of the day, they were just way more powerful and way more experienced. White Lantern John made a tank that was way bigger than Green Lantern John's. Future Flash started bullying Barry because he was basically Wally and Barry combined into one Flash, allowing him to be in multiple places at once. And then what was kind of the nail in the coffin was the World Forger, because his hammer started glowing, which meant one thing and one thing only. It was time to destroy the old multiverse and make way for the new one. But before he could do so, Batman pleaded with him, begging to be given one more chance to convince his friends to accept this new path so that they wouldn't be left behind and imprisoned for eternity. The World Forger didn't want to, but because Bruce was such a big part of the new multiverse and contributed so much to it, he gave him one last opportunity. And with that opportunity, Bruce begged the Justice League to hear him out, to see that this was the only way forward. But none of them were swayed or willing to hear him out in the slightest, forcing yet another huge battle to break out between them. But what if Batman wasn't actually trying to convince them? What if he didn't care if they sided with him at all? What if the entire time he was stalling so that Superman could get to the suns that he moved into orbit, fly through each and every single one of them one by one, and gain so much power that he was able to speed through multiple dimensions and absolutely obliterate the World Forger before he could strike his hammer and destroy the old multiverse? Because that's exactly what Batman was trying to do, and that is why you never doubt the Batgo. Now, after Clark's punch, the World Forger was absolutely devastated. Not so much because of the pain, but because he believed that now they were doomed, because he had looked at every possible path for them to move forward, and Superman just destroyed the only one that worked. Or did he? Because Batman claimed that there was actually one path that he never thought of. One path that would give them a fighting chance to beat Perpetua once and for all. For the World Forger to fight alongside them as the newest member of the Justice League. And so after a bit of convincing, the World Forger accepted their offer, becoming the newest member of the Justice League. And sadly, that's where this story comes to an end. But if you want me to cover more stories like this in the future, let me know in the comments down below.